Well, welcome back for this next segment, and I'm finishing up on how we manage caves or parkland. The modern methodology is a thing called the Visitor Impact Management System. And again, this is largely from the Gillison book, but I think you'll find that whether it's this terminology or other terminology, this is sort of the current state of the art of how we manage resources, natural resource lands. And when we finished last time, I said the key thing in modern visitor impact management is to take quantitative goals, like I want to preserve the beauty of this cave, or the sense of this cave, or the awesome size of it, or the unique critters that crawl through it, or even historical features. I want to preserve that and conserve it so that future generations can see it, but those are qualitative terms. And so I want to turn those into quantitative, measurable goals or objectives. And that's really the trick of this next part, is understanding how to pick that metric, how to pick that yardstick or that measuring stick. What are my environmental standards or indicators that I want to use? Well, the visitor impact management is actually made of two components. The first component is a thing called the Recreation Opportunity Spectrum. I've got these on the slides. It's the ROS. And that is, what sort of opportunities does this cave or this parkland present? The second step is what's called the limits of acceptable change. So the ROS is going to be a classification where I consider geologic and biologic and hydrologic features. I have that in the slide in a minute. And the limits of acceptable change are, what are the indicators I'm going to use, how do I measure them, and how far can I let the measurements change before I need to take action, before I feel that I have started to impact the cave in an adverse way. Let's talk about that visitor impact management. The real trick on both of these is just, how can I measure it, what can I measure, how can I measure it, and how much can I let that change, and is that measuring stick really telling me something? Short answer I'll put there real fast, just to whet your appetite. It's very easy to put a thermometer somewhere in a cave, in the park, out in the woods, and say, I can measure the temperature. In fact, I have in my lab many automatic measuring thermometers that can measure the temperature every 30 seconds and just record it, and once a month or once a week I can go with a computer and download that data, or you might be able to do it now with a smartphone. But what does that really tell me? Does that tell me enough about, am I affecting the cave, or is climate changing? So I need to figure out kind of how both of those work. Well, I said the visitor impact management is made of two components. The first one is Recreation Opportunity Spectrum. And that is where we take caves or any other resource and we group them into 6 categories. I've got a slide of that. The categories I'm going to run through really quickly. Group number 1 is closed caves. Caves that just, they're either too dangerous, they're too precious, they're too unique, or too remote, and so they're just closed. We say nobody goes in, or very, very, very few people go in. There's a famous crystal cave in Mexico that no longer exists. It was punctured by some mining activities. Many people saw it. It had giant gypsum crystals that were 20 feet long. And so people going in there were just dwarfs that looked like miniature people. They were beautiful. I think you can still probably Google that or do a search engine and find that, pictures of that. But the cave was made out of sulfuric acid, and at the depth and part of the world it was in, it was close to 100 degrees Fahrenheit. And as one of my friends pointed out to me once, if at 98.6 I'm the coolest thing inside that cave, then all the sulfuric acid in the atmosphere actually condenses inside my lungs, not out on my skin, like moisture might condense in a fog or something like that. And the last place you want sulfuric acid is inside your lungs. So that became a closed cave very quickly because you needed very specialized gear to even be in there for a few minutes, and then you still were very time limited. Second group is scientific reference caves. We call these preserves. We like to keep some places around the world as the best example of alpine caves, or the best example of a coastal cave or a lava tube cave. And we do that even with pristine surface streams and lakes. Many of our national parks actually have places that we use as preserves. So that's a scientific reference cave. It's a place that we're going to keep as a scientific reference point. Third group is limited access caves. There's something special about them, physically or biologically, or even just in the danger of moving through them or exploring them, that would cause us to limit the access but keep them available. Group 4 is speleological access caves. Those are what we'd call caves for wild tours or adventure caving. That would be a place where maybe there's a little bit of climbing or rappelling or a ladder involved, but if you're with a club that is trained full of people that know how to do that, you can safely get through it, and it makes perfect wild cave tours. Group 5, if you notice we're almost down to 6 out of these 6, is adventure caves. Those are generally accessible ones. They may be ones that you can access in a park or access on a tour or just access with some friends. And that leads us to group 6, which is public access caves. Those are ones that are publicly wide open and accessible to pretty much anybody that wants to go in them. So those are the categories, and I'm using, to make those categories, geological factors, what unique minerals or structures geologically or fossils or layers of rock are exposed in that cave that make me want to categorize it as one of those 6 groups. I think about geomorphology. Does the cave show me something unique about the chronology of life on Earth or development of cave systems? Does it show me genetically how the caves formed? And so is it a really unique feature for that, a way for people to see something like Wind Cave or Jewel Cave in South Dakota? I also look at the hydrologic resources. Are there underground streams or lakes? Is there a unique hidden lake? Is this cave a key conduit of water flowing from one place to another? So I have to consider that. Biologic features. Are there rare or endangered species? Is this cave unique in how many different species are in there? We call that species richness. Is this a nesting area? Here in Missouri, we have in one of our city parks a cave that is well known as a nesting area for maternal bats. Bats tend to be, they tend to have the males go off into what's called a bachelor colony, and the females tend to be, when they're pregnant, all together in one cave with almost no males there. And so when they're giving birth, they're a very unique area, and we want to protect those caves. There's cultural features, there's archaeology. Some places have a spiritual meaning for a various group of people. And there's even regional history. Maybe this is in Missouri we have many caves that get the nickname of this was a cave where Jesse James once hid out, used as a hideout. Whether I can have that history or document it or not, there's many places where there's a regional reason to protect a cave. There's also geographic considerations. Is this a very remote cave and so it should be a wilderness area, or is it very close to the big city, is it in the middle of the big city, and so it would be perhaps a great place for tourism or a great place for education? Is it a place that has some remoteness, and building just the roads and the visitor centers to get there would spoil the cave itself? So I have to think about the infrastructure around that also. Well, once I have those recreation opportunities, then I want to think about the limits of acceptable change. And that is, what am I going to measure? How am I going to measure it? What's it going to tell me? And that's pretty crucial. What are some of the metrics we use? Well, I mentioned temperature already. That's easy to measure. It's easy to say, wow, if I've heated the cave up a couple of degrees Celsius, that's a pretty big change. If my climate heated up, if I got into a hot bath when I wanted a cold one, if I dove into a hot swimming pool, I would know that that wasn't the life I wanted or wasn't what I was hoping to find. There's humidity in a cave. We talked about if I open extra doors or passages, I may dry the cave out, and so the features inside the cave that actually are moisture dependent, the speleothems, may need to be protected, or I may start losing them. They may actually start dissolving, it turns out. A bat count. Temperature and humidity are relatively easy for us to measure. We have lots of sensors. The Weather Service has all sorts of automated stations that do that. I might want to count bats. That's a little trickier. If I said, well, the number of bats on the ceiling is down this month from last month, Maybe that's because it's a hibernation season or a migrating season. I want to think through how easy it is to count bats, and then I want to pick, maybe I count them every February, but that's a time when they're hibernating, so it's easy to see them and count them or estimate them as blocks visually on a roof, but it's also dangerous to go in there and disturb a lot of bats if I have headlamps and flash bulbs or flashes on cameras taking pictures. So you have to think about, how can I actually measure this? How many people does it need? It's fairly labor intensive to do bat surveys. I could look for algae growth on the walls. That would be one indicator that maybe I've got too much light in the cave or too much heat. I have one set of friends who looks for graffiti, that if they're getting graffiti written on a cave, then they need to educate the public, and they need to perhaps protect the resource better. What are some of the other ones you can think of? If you thought of trash, that's another good one. I have some other friends who go in and say, if I continuously see beer bottles back far in the cave in a big room, I know that, people are thinking this is a cool little party place, and they're probably not paying attention to the speleothems. They're probably not cautious of stepping on small animals or crayfish or anything in the cave, and so that might be a risk to the cave. So I'm looking for the metrics, and I really want to figure out what I can measure and what it tells me. I'm a college professor. I do metrics all the time. I create exams for my students, and then I give them a grade on the exam. The trick is, and many of you have probably been in this sort of a classroom environment somewhere, do I ask the right questions, or am I asking trick questions or picayune details that don't really understand the concepts? It's very challenging sometimes to be able to write the right kind of exam that tests the concepts that I want you to learn and involves some of the details without getting lost in all the details. Or maybe the details are important. I know that if I have open heart surgery, I want the surgeon to have actually mastered all the details, not just the basics of how to cut me open and stitch me up, right? So you have to think through, what's my purpose and what metric really lets me measure that? How detailed do I have to be? And that becomes the key then for visitor impact management. How do I pick out the right metric that's easy enough to measure that I can get good data and build a good database, and that it's also a useful indicator? Is it really going to tell me something about what I need to care about to manage that resource, how I protect that cave? These are all details that you can read if you want to read in the Gillison book. I'll note that if you read the Palmer book, he has a very nice approach that he just calls stewardship. It's very early in his book, pages 19 and 20. He's got a lovely little table that says, he boils this all down, we should protect, preserve, restore, and maintain access. Those should be the goals. And the methods to achieve those goals should be educating people about safely caving, and safe not just for the people, but for the cave and for the animals in it and the resource. We should limit the access at some level to people that know how to safely go in a cave and not get lost or not slip off a ledge and hurt themselves. And then we might even want to provide some secrecy about where cave locations are, so that the caves that need a little more special access or caution get that. And I like his last statement for anybody. It's a friendly word that he uses: cave softly and leave no trace. And that's where we'll stop for today. Thanks.